On a flat green, common in the middle of England, on a single morning in May, a charity stacked 180 wooden crates into a wall on the grass. Each crate stood for 100 food parcels. Together they counted out nearly 18,000 parcels of emergency food handed to hungry people over 12 months in a city of just 150,000 souls. And not just any city, this is the richest, cleverest small city in Britain. A short walk from that common sits a single laboratory that cost £1 billion to build. A few miles north, in a low building beside an artificial lake, engineers designed the chip that now sits inside almost every smartphone on the planet. This is the story of a place that won. It produced more wealth per head than almost anywhere in the country, and somewhere along the way it became a city its own people can no longer afford to live in. This is the story of Cambridge, the place the world started calling Silicon Fen, and the strange, quiet truth at the centre of it is this: the very thing that built Cambridge is now the thing destroying the life of the people who live there. To understand how a triumph curdled into something close to a warning, you have to go back, long before the laboratories and the billionaires, to a damp and unpromising stretch of ground, and to a decision made almost 500 years ago. Cambridge should never have become rich. It sits at the southern edge of the Fens, a vast, low, waterlogged plain in the east of England, drained over centuries into farmland so flat the sky seems to press down on it. The land here gave it nothing to get rich on. Cambridge has almost no minerals, no coal, no harbour, no heavy industry to speak of. What it had instead was a university, founded more than 800 years ago, and a long, deliberate habit of keeping itself small. For most of its history, that was the entire point. The colleges of Cambridge owned the ground the town stood on, and they guarded it jealously. When King Henry VIII founded Trinity College in 1546, he handed it land that the college would simply hold, generation after generation, for centuries, and Trinity holds a great deal of it still, ranking among the largest and richest landowners in the entire country. Between them, the colleges of Cambridge would one day be reckoned to sit on wealth approaching £7 billion. The others did the same as Trinity, holding and almost never selling. The result was a city that grew slowly and on purpose, ringed by farmland and water meadow, its skyline of spires and chapels protected by men who thought in lifetimes rather than in years. Cambridge was a town built on scarcity, on land kept deliberately rare and space the colleges hoarded rather than sold. It was a scarcity the city learned to treasure. Remember that word, scarcity, because the whole story turns on it. For most of the 20th century, Cambridge had brilliance but almost no business. The university produced an astonishing density of genius. Around 90 Nobel laureates have been attached to it. Darwin studied here. So did the men who split the atom and the pair who unravelled the structure of life itself. But all that thinking rarely turned into anything you could buy or sell. The cleverness stayed locked behind college walls, admired and unprofitable. The thing that finally unlocked it was, fittingly, a committee. In 1969, a group chaired by the Nobel physicist Sir Neville Mott looked at the city and recommended something almost heretical for Cambridge. Let science-based industry grow up close to the university. Let the knowledge leak out and become money. And it was Trinity College, the ancient landowner, that acted on it. The college took a patch of its own ground on the northern edge of the city, derelict land that the American army had used during the Second World War to prepare tanks and vehicles for the D-Day landings, and decided to turn it into something Britain had never had before. In 1970, guided by its bursar, Sir John Bradfield, Trinity opened the Cambridge Science Park. It was the first science park in the country and the first in Europe, modelled loosely on what Stanford University had done beside the orchards of California a decade or so before. The idea was simple and strange. Take the world-class research happening a few miles away, give it cheap, pleasant space to set up shop and watch what happened. At first, not much happened at all. The first tenant, a small firm called LaserScan, arrived in 1973. By the end of the decade, only a couple of dozen companies had joined it, scattered around landscape lakes and lawns. Britain in the 1970s was an economy in trouble, and a science park in a fen looked, to most observers, like a polite academic experiment that might quietly come to nothing. And then, on the same northern edge of the same small city, two men started a company that would change everything. In 1978, a physicist named Hermann Hauser and an entrepreneur named Chris Curry founded Acorn Computers. Their timing was perfect. The home computer was being born and Acorn landed the contract of a lifetime. The British Broadcasting Corporation wanted a machine to anchor a television series, teaching the nation how to use computers, a machine to sit in every classroom in the country. Acorn built it and called it the BBC Micro. It sold more than 1 million units, and a whole generation of British children, including a good many who would later build the cluster themselves, learned what a computer was on an Acorn machine. Hauser, an Austrian-born physicist who had come to Cambridge for his doctorate and never really left, would go on to seed and fund company after company. In time, he became the closest thing Silicon Fen ever had to a godfather. But the BBC Micro is not why Acorn matters to this story. Acorn matters because of what two of its engineers did next. A young designer named Sophie Wilson, working with a colleague named Steve Ferber, set out to build a new kind of processor, a brain for the next generation of computers. They wanted it to be simple, elegant, and astonishingly efficient with power. They called the design the Acorn RISC machine. In time, the world would know it by its initials, ARM. It is hard to overstate what they created in that unglamorous office. The ARM design sipped electricity instead of guzzling it, which made it close to useless for the desktop computers of the 1980s, and absolutely perfect for the things nobody had quite invented yet. The mobile phone and the smartphone, the tablet and the earbud, and the watch on your wrist. Today, chips built on ARM's designs power almost every smartphone on Earth, tens of billions of them every single year. A piece of mathematics dreamed up beside a Cambridgeshire lake ended up in nearly every pocket on the planet. By the middle of the 1980s, people had begun to notice that something improbable was happening in this small city. In 1985, a firm of consultants called Seagull Quince Wicksteed wrote a report trying to explain it, and they gave the thing its name, the Cambridge phenomenon. They traced almost every high technology company in the area back to a single route, the university. Clever people were spinning their ideas out into companies, and crucially, Cambridge let them keep the rewards. The university's policy on intellectual property was unusually generous, allowing academics to own and exploit what they invented. In 1987 came the St. John's Innovation Centre, one of the first business incubators in the country. The leak Sir Neville Mott had recommended had become a flood. In 1990, the ARM design was spun out of Acorn into a company of its own, in a joint venture that drew in the American giant Apple. The new firm started life in a converted barn outside the city, with a dozen engineers and a first chief executive, Robin Saxby, who decided not to manufacture a single chip. ARM would design and license and let the whole world build its ideas into their hardware. It was a quiet genius of a business model, and it turned a barn full of engineers into one of the most important companies on the planet. By the turn of the millennium, the floodgates were fully open. More than 1,000 high technology companies set up in and around Cambridge in the space of 5 years. The giants came calling. In 1997, Microsoft chose Cambridge for its first research laboratory anywhere outside the United States, pouring in £50 million and sending Bill Gates himself to the city to bless it. Apple was already here, Amazon would follow, and so would a couple of hundred more international corporations, all of them wanting a Cambridge address and the brains that came with it. In the year 2000, the government even helped wire the city directly to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the better to pump American know-how into the fen. The little fen town had become, in the words of one newspaper, the crown jewel of Britain's technology sector, Britain's answer to Silicon Valley. And the comparison, it would turn out, was more exact than anyone intended. This is the city at its zenith. Picture it. Thousands of companies clustered into a handful of square miles, generating tens of billions of pounds in turnover a year. By one careful count, the companies gathered around Cambridge turned over more than £35 billion between them and employed better than 200,000 people. At one point in the early 2000s, close to a quarter of all the venture capital invested in the whole of Britain flowed into this single cluster. The university by itself was reckoned to feed something like £30 billion into the national economy. There were a dozen and more so-called unicorns, private companies each worth more than $1 billion, and for a stretch the cluster was hatching roughly one new one every year. Machine learning engineers were offered salaries that ran into the millions. Out at the southern edge of the city, on the Cambridge Biomedical campus beside Addenbrooke's Hospital, the drug company AstraZeneca built its global headquarters, a vast ring of glass and concrete called the Discovery Centre, on a street they named after Francis Crick. The company had uprooted itself from the Cheshire countryside more than 100 miles away to be here, in the thick of the science, gathering over 2,000 scientists under one roof. The architects who had built the Tate Modern gave it walls of glass, so that anyone walking past could watch the research being done inside. It was meant to cost around £300 million. By the time it opened in 2021, after years of delay, it had cost close to £1 billion. A single building, £1 billion. And once a Cambridge company grew large enough, the world's giants came to buy it. The pattern repeated like a refrain. The wireless chip firm Cambridge Silicon Radio sold to the American company Qualcomm for more than $2 billion. The printing technology company Domino sold to a Japanese conglomerate for £1 billion. Time and again, an idea born in a college laboratory was nurtured into a business and then carried off across an ocean. Cambridge had become a kind of orchard, and the largest companies on earth came each season to pick the fruit. And the city minted personal fortunes to match. None was more dazzling, or in the end more haunting, than the story of Mike Lynch. Lynch took a Cambridge doctorate and, in 1996, founded a software company called Autonomy Out of Work he had done in the city. Its software could read and make sense of unstructured information, the messy text and audio and video that ordinary databases choked on, and it rode that idea to the top. Autonomy grew into the biggest technology firm Britain had, and in 2011, the American giant Hewlett-Packard bought it for $11 billion. Lynch became one of the richest self-made men in the country, dubbed inevitably Britain's Bill Gates. He went on to back other Cambridge success stories with a venture fund of his own, including the cybersecurity firm Darktrace. Here was the dream made flesh, a boy with a doctorate, an idea, and a city that knew exactly how to turn ideas into money. What almost nobody watching the champagne that year could have guessed was how darkly the story would end, and how soon the triumph would start to rot. The single sharpest illustration of all that wealth came in 2016. The Japanese conglomerate SoftBank bought Arm, the company born in that barn, for £24 billion. £24 billion. Overnight, the deal made a great many ordinary Cambridge engineers into millionaires. People who had spent their careers designing chips beside a lake woke up rich. The fen had delivered. By any measure that a government or an economist cares about, Cambridge had won, and won completely. So how does a city that has won this comprehensively end up stacking food crates on its own village green? The answer is the cruelest kind of irony, because this was never bad luck. It was success doing exactly what it was always going to do. Cambridge was built on scarcity, and scarcity, it turns out, does not care whether you are poor or whether you are rich beyond imagining. Pour billions of pounds and tens of thousands of high-paid workers into a small city that spent 5 centuries deliberately refusing to grow. And the scarcity does not break, it simply changes sides. The thing that gave Cambridge its beauty and its character becomes a vice that closes around the throats of the people who actually live there. It shows up first, and most brutally, in the price of a roof. A home in Cambridge now costs, on average, somewhere close to £500,000. To buy a typical house in the city, A person on a typical local wage needs around 11 times their entire annual salary in a country where the average is already a punishing 7.5. In the prettiest corners, near the historic colleges, in a neighbourhood like Newnham, the average house sails past £1 million. The salaries here are among the highest outside London, and it does not matter. The wages chase the prices and never catch them. A school teacher, a nurse at Addenbrooke's, a bus driver, a young researcher on a short contract, the very people a functioning city is built from, find themselves locked out of the place they serve. And the gap between the winners and the rest runs like a chasm through the middle of a single small city. In 2017, and again the year after, the think tank Centre for Cities studied the income of every major city in Britain and found the most unequal of them all in an unlikely place. More unequal than London, more unequal than any faded mill town in the north. The answer was this small, gracious university town. By their measure, Cambridge was as unequal all on its own as you might expect an entire country to be. A sliver of top earners, fewer than 1 in 16 residents, took home around a fifth of all the income in the city, while the poorest fifth shared a tiny fraction of it. The wealth of Silicon Fen, the council itself admitted, had simply never reached the communities that lacked the skills or the luck to plug into it. The town and the gown, the city and the university, had drifted into two different worlds, occupying the same medieval streets. There was a bitter geometry to who felt the squeeze and who did not. Many of the university's own scholars were, to a striking degree, shielded from it. They could take rooms in their colleges at gentle rents, dine in hall at subsidised tables, and borrow against cheap, university-backed schemes to get a first foot on the property ladder. The people who cleaned those rooms and cooked in those halls, the porters and the carers, the cleaners and the shop staff, enjoyed no such cushion. They were pushed steadily outward to the ragged edges of the city and into the towns and villages beyond, then bussed and driven back in each morning to keep running a place they could no longer afford to live in. You can read that chasm in something far starker than money. You can read it in years of human life. Travel from one of the wealthy wards of Cambridge to one of the poor ones, a journey of barely a few miles, and the life expectancy drops by around a decade. 10 years of life gone between one end of a small city and the other. If you are finding this story as unsettling as I do, take a second to subscribe before we go on, because what is happening to Cambridge is happening in slower motion to a lot of successful places, and the next part is where it stops being about money and starts being about whether the city can physically function at all. Because here is where the irony deepens past the point of comfort. The poverty in Cambridge does not hide in some distant district. It sits a few streets from the Glass and the Billions, in wards with names like Abbey and King's Hedges. In the north and east of the city, the food hubs and the welcome centres do their quiet work within sight of the science parks. The charity that stacked those crates, Cambridge City Food Bank, recently came through the worst year in its history, handing out close to 18,000 emergency food parcels in 12 months, demand rising year after year. One of its organisers asked the only question that matters. How can it be right, she said, that in one of the wealthiest cities, in one of the richest countries in the world, this many people, including this many children, are going hungry? World-class companies, the council put it, now sit cheek by jowl with some of the most deprived communities in the country. And then there is the water. This is the detail that turns the whole story from a fable about greed into something stranger and more profound. Cambridge sits in one of the driest regions in the entire United Kingdom. It has no great river to draw on, no mountains catching the rain. Almost all of its drinking water, very nearly all of it, is pumped up out of the ground, out of a thin layer of chalk beneath the fields to the south of the city. Day after day, the water companies haul something like 84 million litres up out of that chalk, enough to fill dozens of Olympic swimming pools every single day, and a sizable share of it leaks straight back out through aging pipes before it ever reaches a tap. That chalk feeds a handful of rare and delicate streams, the kind of clear, cold, gravel-bedded chalk streams that barely exist anywhere else on the planet. Something close to 4/5 of all the chalk streams in the world are in England. Cambridge sits on top of some of the last of them, and was draining them faster than the rain could ever put back. For decades, nobody worried about it, but pour a global technology boom onto a thin chalk aquifer in the driest corner of England, build laboratory after laboratory, demand thousands of new homes for thousands of new workers, and the maths stops working. The streams began to suffer. In the dry summer of 2019, some of them simply ran dry, and the famous River Cam itself was reduced to a trickle. The watchdogs took notice. The Environment Agency warned that the water bodies around Cambridge were at risk, and that no new development could be allowed to take more water from that fragile ground. Read that again, because it is almost too perfect. The cleverest city in Britain, the place that designs the brains of the world's machines and the medicines of the future, hit a wall made of water. At one point, plans for around 9,000 new homes and vast amounts of new laboratory and office space sat frozen in the planning system, unable to proceed, because there was not enough water to give them. The fixes on offer were slow and improvised. A scheme of so-called water credits, paying to make old buildings more efficient so that new ones might be allowed to go ahead, primed with a few £1,000,000. A reservoir promised out in the fens, and a pipeline to borrow water from a lake to the west, neither of them ready for the better part of a decade or more. The city that can solve almost anything could not, in the end, conjure water out of a dry fen. The roads tell the same story in miniature. As the money and the workers piled in, the small medieval street plan, built for carts and bicycles, simply seized up. While traffic across most of Britain was easing, Cambridge went the other way, climbing into the list of the 10 most congested cities in the country, with delays rising by around 15% in a single year. The obvious answer, a charge on cars entering the city to pay for better buses, was proposed and then abandoned in 2023 when the politics proved impossible, after most of those who responded to the consultation came out against it. Around 18 bus routes across the county had already been axed in a single round only a year or two before. A city famous for having more cyclists than almost anywhere in Britain found itself increasingly sitting still. And into all of this, the government walked with a dream. In 2023, the Minister Michael Gove floated a plan to transform Cambridge into, in his words, the Silicon Valley of Europe, with up to 250,000 new homes built around it over 2 decades, swelling the population several times over. It was meant to sound visionary. Locally, it landed as something close to madness. The council said they had not even been consulted. The area's own Member of Parliament called it a pipe dream that would not survive contact with reality, and pointed again at the one thing nobody could argue with. There simply is not enough water. You cannot build a rival to Silicon Valley, he said, by using Cambridge as a cash cow for housing developers when the taps are already running low. The dream did not die with that minister. Under the government that followed, the ambition came back wearing a new name, a Cambridge growth company charged with mapping the city's future. Ministers once again promising a Silicon Valley of Europe stretched along the corridor that runs from Oxford through Milton Keynes to Cambridge, fresh thousands of homes penciled in on the site of the old city airport, And once again, from the councils and the campaigners and the water experts, came the same patient, exhausted reply that there was still no answer to the oldest question of all, the question of where, exactly, the water was supposed to come from. There is a version of this story where the tech boom itself is collapsing, and that version would be neat, and it would be false. The companies are mostly still here. The money is still here. Even now there are tremors. Late in 2025, AstraZeneca paused a planned investment in the very city it had bet its future on. A reminder that even the giants can hesitate. But the deeper fall in Cambridge is not the fall of an industry. It is the fall of a way of living. The thing that has broken is the ordinary promise that a person who works in a place can afford to exist in it. Cambridge got everything it ever wished for, and the wish came with a price tag its own residents are paying in rent, in commuting hours, in years of life, and in trips to the food bank. And nothing captures the fragility hidden beneath all that brilliance quite like the way the story of Mike Lynch ended. After Hewlett-Packard bought his company, the dream soured into a decade-long nightmare. Barely a year after the sale, the Americans wrote down the value of autonomy by close to $9 billion and accused Lynch of having inflated what the company was really worth. He always denied it, insisting Hewlett-Packard had simply botched the takeover and gone looking for someone to blame. The case ground on for years across 2 countries until he was extradited to the United States, and the whole bitter saga reached a courtroom in San Francisco. There, in the summer of 2024, against the odds and after months under house arrest, Mike Lynch was acquitted of every charge. A free man again, vindicated, he gathered his family and the friends and lawyers who had stood by him and took them out onto the Mediterranean off the coast of Sicily to celebrate aboard his super yacht. He had named the yacht the Bayesian. It was a private joke for a mathematician, named after a branch of statistics, the mathematics of probability and prediction, the very ideas his fortune had been built on. A man who had grown rich teaching machines to predict the world, and in the small hours of an August morning, a freak and violent storm, a column of spinning wind that witnesses called a waterspout, came out of the dark and knocked the Bayesian over in seconds. The yacht sank. Mike Lynch died, and so did his 18-year-old daughter and 5 others. 2 days earlier, his co-defendant from the trial, the man acquitted alongside him, had been killed by a car while out for a run. The mathematician of prediction, undone by the one thing he could not predict. It is the kind of ending that no scriptwriter would dare invent, and it is true, and it sits over the whole city like a warning, written in a language we keep refusing to read. All that intelligence, all that money, all that mastery over the future, and in the end, the oldest and simplest forces win. A storm, a thin layer of chalk, a patch of ground that costs more than a life of wages. So walk through Cambridge today, and you will see the paradox standing in plain sight if you know how to look. Out on the biomedical campus, the glass ring of the Discovery Centre catches the light, and inside it scientists hunt for the medicines of the next century. A few streets away, in a church hall in Arbury or by the Mill Road, a volunteer hands a parent a 3-day parcel of tinned food and a warm drink. Up the Milton Road, the traffic crawls past the Science Park, past the lakes where it all began, past the Barn Bread Company, whose chips are in the phone in every one of those idling cars. And out beyond the new estates, a chalk stream that has run clear for 10,000 years runs thin, while the cranes that would build the future stand idle for want of water to pour into it. It began with scarcity, treasured and protected 500 years ago. A small city, kept small on purpose by men who loved it. And it ends, for now, with scarcity again. Only this time the scarcity is a cage. The same instinct that made Cambridge beautiful made it impossible. The triumph and the tragedy turned out to be the same fact, seen from 2 sides. That wall of food crates stood on the grass for a single day, and then it came down, and the parcels went out to the hungry of the richest small city in Britain. The chip that was born here is still in your pocket, doing its quiet, brilliant work right now as you watch this. Cambridge solved the future. It just forgot to leave room in it for the people who live there. If this story stayed with you, the video now on your screen is one I think you'll find just as worth your time. go ahead and click it. And if you'd like more journeys like this one into the places that won and the strange price they paid for winning, then subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.